what I'm trying to lay out is two things. One, de facto, we don't agree about things. We really don't. If anyone thinks there's a moral consensus, read American newspapers or Italian newspapers. There are real disagreements about when it is licit, obligatory, or forbidden to kill people, to have sex with people, or to take their property without their permission. More than that, we have grounds to come to the conclusion why, in principle, we can't resolve the controversy. Then we're at now to E here. What are the general implications of moral pluralism? Well, first, moral pluralism is not equivalent to moral relativism. One might still hold that one knows the truth but can't prove it to others. So it does not follow that from being a moral pluralist that one is a moral relativist. Two, moral pluralism results from the limits of secular moral epistemology, and that we surely can see. Three, a secular moral philosophical epistemology does not warrant a moral metaphysical skepticism. You can't show there is no moral truth. And lastly, and very importantly, and this bears upon what the authority of governments could be, a deliberative democracy that would establish a canonical bioethics with moral authority cannot, in principle, be realized. Consequently, law and public policy usually reflect a particular established modus vivendi. That is, when people really don't agree about basic moral premises and rules of moral evidence, they obey the government because it's a prudent thing to do, not because they think moral rationality requires it. Everybody with it? Okay, so now a point of summary. This is to remind us that there are only 4 ways to resolve controversies. Some people probably wondered why I brought the attaché case here for the lecture. In the attaché case, there's an Uzi pistol. Uzi does it. Have you ever seen the wonderful advertisements for Uzi pistols? They are fantastic. They collapse in. Imagine I tell you that I will require of everyone, including the man just coming in through the door, that you agree to C.I. Lewis's Modal System 5. Otherwise, I'll kill you. You say, why should I die for a modal system? I mean, logic is nice, but not worth dying for. So use of force can bring to closure debates, though in your heart you might say, number 3 is the right one, but you won't speak of it. So that's the first. The second way is to convert you to my moral perspective, either secular ideology or religion. The third is the hope that I can have a sound rational argument, which will bring you to it. And the third way to resolve controversies is simply by agreement. What we do together when we agree to do things. Imagine that everyone in the world is killed except the people in this room. And then for this gentleman, another room just as big, full of born-again Southern Baptists who know what the following condition are there, along with a whole bunch of born-again East Texas atheists, all of the followers of Milton Friedman in town, and those who are Baader-Meinhof socialists. And we have to form a government. Well, if we have to form a government, we're not going to agree about God, nor are we going to agree about morality. What we'll say, well, look, at least we can collaborate together if we don't touch each other without the other person's permission. And a person who doesn't agree to play the game has no ground to protest when we shoot it. So what government becomes in the minimal state is a game with, once you play in it, you can then explain why you're shooting the person who's not playing it, because that person didn't want to make any claims of being used without the person's consent. But you get the minimal state and no more than that. You have no idea of how to rank what is good or bad. You simply have a sparse right-making condition. So as we start worrying about morality and start worrying about bioethics, to get it, and of course there's no reason to say it would be bad not to play that game, but only if you walk into it, then the people who use force against those who don't play the game have an internally justified ground for force. Given moral pluralism, how and why did bioethics arise? Engelhardt, you just told us, de facto there's moral pluralism all over. And also you have pointed out that it began to be salient already in the beginning of the 19th century. In some sense, Hegel, a guy who lived between 1770 and 1831, understood that Kant's arguments wouldn't work, so people should have known that bioethics wouldn't be able to do the stuff that it actually did. Well, the answer in part is why people so much hoped there'd be something like bioethics. Remember what happened in the mid-20th century in America. One, medical ethics and the claims of clinical moral epistemology were discounted. That is, medicine was incrementally turned from a quasi-guild into a trade, beginning with a suit that went to the Supreme Court in 1943, which said that physicians could not have a medical ethics that was in restraint of trade. So if what they took to be moral norms had financial consequences, the people who held that they had those financial consequences would be held to triple damages. My father's father was party to the suit and losing it. Then in the 1980s, the Federal Trade Commission said that one could not impose upon physicians restraints on advertisement that were also restraints on trade. So as by the time one got in the beginning of the 1980s, physicians were no longer seen as the judge of their own mores, but they needed someone else to provide that mores because their mores had been held to be provincial. Secondly, what happened was that there was a dramatic secularization of America. What one sees is an incremental secularization of America, just as there is a marginalization of physicians as members of a guild. In addition to that taking place, there was the whole mid-20th century was a period in which traditional authority was brought into question, so that the reruns of the TV series Father Knows Best don't have many demands nowadays. So what had a moral vacuum? Physicians as moral experts were marginalized. Priests, rabbis, and ministers were marginalized. A highly individualistic culture surfaced. It was reflected in such holdings as Canterbury versus Spence in 1972 from the District of Columbia, which was the first major case to move from professional standard for disclosure for informed consent to treat to the so-called reasonable prudent person or objective standard, and after that it was followed by holdings in Maryland and elsewhere. All of that happened just as medicine was becoming effective, it was becoming expensive, and seeming to pose new questions. So just as one needed guidance, the old guides were marginalized, and now it's simply a footnote to the character of history. The Kennedy Institute, a Roman Catholic institution, with the founders being Sergeant Shriver and Andre Helliges, presumed natural law arguments would work. And so they reached right back to the first scholasticism in the 13th century to the second scholasticism in the 16th century, found people who were also believers in the Enlightenment view of progress, and they're the people who then said, well, bioethics will be able to establish a canonical morality. Of course it didn't. All right, we're getting close to the end. Look at the bottom. How can bioethics have succeeded so well in the face of moral pluralism? I mean, everybody's saying, gosh, we need more bioethics. This is just great. How could they possibly be so successful if all you say is true? Well, first, academic bioethics works just like moral philosophy. It offers intellectual orientation by analyzing crucial concepts, assessing the soundness of arguments on behalf of particular positions, and providing a historical and analytic geography of the various positions on major bioethical issues, thus clarifying the matters at stake. Kant thinks this, Bentham thinks that, act-utilitarians like J.J.C. Smart think that. And so you lay out the geography and say, wow, that was really fantastic. If you go to a philosophy department, like mine at Rice, we have at least 6 people who consider themselves really good moral philosophers. They are probably have 12 different views about any substantive issue. And so people are quite at peace with academic moral theorists not agreeing with themselves day to day or with their colleagues. But they still offer a picture of how our culture functions and the foundations and articulations of ideas that frame it. So too with academic bioethics. Clinical bioethics offers a bundle of non-morally normative services that include providing legal advice. We did a survey when we looked at one of our hospitals, what were the most frequent questions asked, and they were, what's necessary to fill out an advance directive? Who can really consent on this circumstance? If the person is incompetent, who is the surrogate under Texas law? So what one has is bioethicists giving legal advice cheaper than my brother and sister-in-law, who are lawyers, would give the advice. 2, they mediate disputes. 3, they facilitate decision-making. There are people saying, look at this point, look at that point. They facilitate risk management, because if you get the bioethicists come in and make a note, it shows you've done due diligence. So bioethics functions very, very well and can do splendidly without ever noticing that moral pluralism impedes people from rarely giving really in-your-face normative guidance. We're down to the end. There is, as a result, no global bioethics that can exist by authorized by a common morality, because such a common morality doesn't exist. Appeals to consensus will not remedy the situation. For consensus to be authoritative, one must determine whose agreement and to what extent counts for what. To such questions there is, unfortunately, even about consensus, a plurality of answers. The moral significance of appeals to consensus is thus undermined, and the increased de facto diversity of bioethics shows that de facto it is impossible. Moreover, the last 3 of Agrippa's Pentaetropoi show that it is in principle impossible. And there we find ourselves lamentably today.